Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the previous lecture, we started our discussion about the integumentary system. We said that it is the system which is covering the body and it is formed of skin and its appendages. We started our discussion by talking about the structure, differentiation, and function of epidermal components of the skin. Today, we'll continue our discussion on the dermis and skin appendages. The layers of skin. The outermost layer covering the skin is called the epidermis. Underneath the epidermis is the dermis. The epidermis is formed of stratified squamous epithelium, as we will know, and the dermis is formed mainly of connective tissues. The dermis has two regions. The papillary layer underneath the epidermis, and this is formed of loose connective tissue, and the reticular layer, which is formed of collagenous connective tissue. Under the dermis is the hypodermis, which is formed mainly of fat cells, and it binds the skin to the underlying structures such as the muscles. Epidermal junction. The dermis and the epidermis of normal human skin are functionally separated by a basement membrane, but together form a stable structural continuum, as we will see. Now, the basal cells are connected by hemidesmosomes to the basal lamina, which is formed of lamina lucida and lamina densa, and then special collagen fibers connects the basal lamina to the collagen of the dermis. In electron micrograph, we'll find that the intracellular keratin filaments, that is the keratin filaments inside the cell, is connected to the hemidesmosome, which is found on the basal membrane of these cells. The hemidesmosome connects the basal part and so connects actually the keratin filaments inside with the hemidesmosomes to the basement membrane. It connects these structures to the lamina lucida of basement membrane by anchoring filaments. And the anchoring filaments also connects the lamina lucida to the lamina densa of the basement membrane. The lamina densa, in turn, connects by anchoring fibers which are formed of type 7 collagen, connects the whole structures to the collagen fibers within the dermis. And as you see, these connections make the connection between the basal cells and the dermis very strong, and hence the connection between the dermis and epidermis, very strong connection. The dermis. The dermis is a dynamic, supportive, connective tissue, harboring cells, fibrous tissue, and ground substances, with accessory structures and vascular and nerve plexuses running through it. The dermis is formed of two zones. The upper zone under the epidermis is called the papillary dermis, and under that is the reticular dermis. The papillary dermis is covered by the epidermis on the skin. In thick skin, especially fingertips, we'll find that the epidermis form thick parallel primary ridges which are raised above the surface of the skin and separated by primary grooves in between the ridges. In the center of each primary dermal ridge, the secondary groove is a groove in which the dermal papillae contains abundant ground substance and a loose meshwork of thin, poorly organized collagen, because it is a kind of loose connective tissue. This structure is different from one person to another, and the primary ridges and primary grooves appear on the top of the skin of the tip of fingers as the fingerprints. In the thin skin, however, the epidermis-dermis interface is much less complex. The reticular layer of the dermis. The reticular layer of the dermis is found deep to the papillary layer. Although its thickness varies in different parts of the body, it is always considerably thicker and less cellular than the papillary layer. It is characterized by thick, somewhat regular bundles of mostly type 1 collagen and by coarser elastic fibers. The regularity of collagen bundles and the fibers form regular lines of tension in the skin, which are called Langer's lines. Langer's lines are very important during surgery, since the incisions made parallel to it heal with the least scarring. Cutaneous circulation. The circulation accommodates nutrition of the skin and appendages. There is arterial supply and venous drainage of the circulation. There is a large cutaneous plexus found in the reticular layer of dermis, supplying the accessory structures such as the hair and the glands. Increased blood flow facilitates heat loss in hot conditions, and decreased blood flow minimize heat loss in cold conditions, and so keep the skin temperature. The papillary plexus is the group of blood vessels that are found in the papillary layer and very important for nourishment and oxygen supply of the papillary layer and the overlying epidermis and epidermal cells. The hair. The hair is formed, it's derived from the epidermis. It consists of two distinct parts. The hair follicle, which is formed of stratified squamous epithelium, and the hair shaft, which is formed of cornified keratinocytes that form the shaft. The sebaceous gland opens in the hair follicle, and the erector pili muscle is attached to the hair follicle. The hair. The hair follicle can be divided into three regions. Infundibulum, and this is from the surface to the opening of sebaceous glands. The isthmus, which is from the end of the infundibulum to the region of insertion of erector pili muscles, and the inferior segment, which is from the isthmus down to the hair bulb. The infundibulum. The infundibulum extends from the surface opening of the follicle to the level of the opening of its sebaceous gland, as we said. The infundibulum is a part of the pilosebaceous gland. Pilo means hair, sebaceous means the sebaceous gland canal, and so the canal in which the hair and the sebaceous secretion or sebum is found in it. It is used as a route for the discharge of the oily substance of the sebaceous gland, which is called sebum. It is lined by stratified squamous epithelium sheath, exactly like the epidermis, and it is resting on a basement membrane. The isthmus. The isthmus extends from the infundibulum to the level of insertion of the erector pili muscle, as we said. The lower part has a bulge of stem cells that can reform the degenerating hair, as we will see that the cells under this part are continuously degenerating and regenerating. This regeneration occurs from these cells, and so the part of the hair above this bulge is a constant part which does not degenerate, but the part underneath that is a degenerating part. The inferior segment. The inferior segment is the dynamic part of the follicle, as we said, because its cells are continuously undergo apoptosis to die and then reformed by the bulge stem cells. It is the dynamic part of the follicle. is of nearly uniform diameter except at its base, where it expands to form the bulb. The base of the bulb is invaginated by a tuft of vascularized loose connective tissue called the dermal papillae. The connective tissue there is very important for triggering the reformation of the lost part of the hair. Now, the interior segment of the follicle is surrounded by dense fibrous connective tissue of the dermis, and this is followed by a glassy membrane, which is a basement membrane on which rests a stratified squamous epithelium forming the outer root sheet. The inner root sheet in this part is formed of two types or groups of cells: the Henle's layer underneath the outer root sheet and the Huxley layer following that, and inside there is the cuticle, which covers the inner part of the hair follicle. The lumen, or the inner part of the hair follicle, contains the hair shaft. The hair shaft is covered by cuticle, thick cuticle of hard keratin. Underneath it is a cortex of dead cells. Then in the middle there is a medulla, the medulla. Now, hair cycle. We said that the hair, having all the three parts, including the part that has the bulb and the hair itself, the bulb contains the cells that regenerate the hair shaft, or form the hair shaft, continuously form the hair shaft. And so as long as the bulb is there with its cells, the hair shaft is continuously formed and elongates. This phase is called Anagen Phase. So the hair grows outwards in this phase from the bulb at about 1 centimeter per month for 3 years. Then a Catagen phase is followed, in which the hair follicle begins to die. The cells of the hair follicle of the lower part begin to die, and die by apoptosis. This lasts for 3 weeks. Of course, when the bulb cells die, they stop forming the hair shaft, and so it doesn't elongate anymore. Now, the telogen phase, the cells above the bulb start to die by apoptosis, and the remains of the hair bulb are inactive, and the attached hair easily falls out. This lasts for 3 months. The telogen comes or reaches the bulged cells of stem cells, and so the late telogen stem cells within the bulge begin to form new keratinocytes, and the cycle starts over with a new anagen phase, and the hair is formed again. The glands of the skin. Sebaceous, we have three types of glands: sebaceous glands, eccrine glands, and apocrine glands. The sebaceous glands are holocrine glands prominent in facial skin and scalp. The palms and soles are the only regions devoid or do not have sebaceous glands. They are lobular with clusters of acini, opening into a single short duct. Eccrine gland. They are located deep in the dermis, and they are simple coiled tubular glands. A cylinder coiled duct traverses the dermis and the epidermis to open on the surface of the skin by a sweat pore. The apocrine sweat glands. They are found only in the axilla, in the areola of the nipple, in the anal region, in the eyelids as Moll's glands, and in the external ear canal as ceruminous glands. They are located deeper than the eccrine glands. They are located in deep portions of the dermis and hypodermis. They release their secretion onto the skin surface at the base of the hair shaft above the opening of the sebaceous gland. Apocrine sweat glands are tubular coiled secretory glands lined by simple cuboidal epithelium that releases apocrine secretion, means that releases their secretion from the top of the cells in wide lumen. The nail. The nail develops from cells of the nail matrix, a region of the nail root. And this forms the nail plate, which is heavily compacted, highly keratinized epithelial cells. At the distal part of the nail plate, there is a lunula or half moon, which is found in the distal part. The nail plate rests on the epidermis known as the nail bed, which is usually thin epidermis that can show the underlying blood vessels. That's why the nail plate appears red. The nail plate is fixed under folds of skin, which are called proximal nail fold and lateral nail fold. It's fixed also at the proximal part by eponychium, which is stratum corneum firmly adheres to the plate, while the anterior of the plate has the hyponychium, which is epidermis under the free margin.